Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's May 22nd, 2020, and this is an Ask Me Anything video. So Tim from Tim's Homestead commented and asked a question on the first Food Forest tour that I made. And during that video I talked about how I was going to have to use the flame weeder to try and get control over all the weeds that had taken off in the asparagus bed. And that's the bed that goes right along the bioremediation canal system. And Tim wrote back, "Hi Kevin, I'm very interested to see how and when you torch the weeds in your asparagus beds. My small bed excuse me. My small bed is overwhelmed with weeds, and it is a tough job, impossible parenthetically, to pull them out. If you could make a video when you do that, it would be great. Awesome Food Forest tour. Glad you're feeling better." Me too. Each day I'm feeling better. So thanks, Tim, for the question and all. And so the first thing I should say, excuse me. The first thing I should say is what I did do with the asparagus bed isn't what I would consider flame weeding with the gardening systems that I use. I would call it flail and burn, a totally different approach to killing the weeds, or at least trying to get a foothold so that you've got a starting place to get the weeds under control in an area that the weeds have taken off in. So the first thing I should say is, when I'm talking about flail mowing with our permanent raised beds and all, ideally, I talk about how the winds bring in the weed seeds, the birds bring in the weed seeds, but around here the winds do. And using the tarp systems that we do use to keep the beds covered during the winter months, it really reduces the weed demand, the weeds and all. But as you could see, last year in our central garden beds, I did not use weed mats. Those black mats that we use in the paths and on the beds to help manage weeds during the season. And I got so busy working in the greenhouse last year, I didn't do adequate weeding or cultivation. So the ideal time to get control of weeds is when the weed seed has first set up its cotyledon leaves. Those are the two first leaves that emerge, and then we get either the first true leaves, which looks like the second set of leaves, or the third set of leaves. In that situation, when we flame weed those new seedlings, what we're doing is we're just briefly going over the surface of the bed, and the heat from the flame weeder isn't actually burning those weeds. It's just warm enough to damage the cell walls, which decrease the ability for those leaves to do photosynthesis and send energy down to the root system. After all, those weed seeds are newly developed root systems, so there's no storage system. It's used up all its storage to produce the radicle, the root going down initially, and those first couple sets of leaves going up. So the whole process has just begun, and it's used up all of the nutrient reserves that are in the seed itself. So the best way to kill these buggers is to just heat them up to the point, not burn them, to where the cell walls and the cell membranes as well get disrupted and they no longer can do photosynthesis. There's a whole process that's involved, but when they can't do photosynthesis, they can't take and put those carbohydrates down into the root system to develop a more established root system, and so that the plant can grow further. So that's flame weeding, and those are those just recently emerged weed seeds. So when I pull the tarps off the beds and there aren't any weed mats in it, I might go down and water the beds, use a use a hose with a nozzle on it just to wet down the beds in case there are any weed seeds when I pulled off the mats or pulled off the tarps and all. And those weed seeds within 2 weeks time are going to go ahead and emerge and start, you'll see those little tiny green or reddish looking leaves that are first coming up. First the cotyledons, and then the first first and second set of true leaves from the seeds themselves. That's the time. Excuse me. That's the time to basically drive the flame weeder over the bed. I'm sorry about the coughing. To drive the flame weeder over the bed, and you're moving along at a steady pace, not fast, but just a nice slow walking pace. You don't see any sizzling, you don't see any browning or blackening of the weed seeds themselves. So that is what I consider flame weeding, the proper use of whatever torch system that you have. That's a way of killing them. Now there are multiple different tools that one can purchase to go ahead and take care of these newly emerged weed seeds, the newly sprouted weed seeds in your garden beds. See, that's the best time to get them. That's also the best time to use a wire weeder. And I've shown before the wire weeders that I use, because all you're doing on a nice dry day when there hasn't been rain overnight, and maybe you turn off the irrigation so the surface of the soil is pretty dry, what you're doing with that wire weeder is you're just going along the surface of the soil, and that dislodges the roots of those small newly emerged weed seeds. It pulls the roots up from that nice protective soil, and it leaves it on the surface of the bed, and the sun hits them, dries them out. So doing that, relatively early in the morning, shortly after the sun comes up, is a good time to do the wire weeding. And so that's a different way of killing those weed seeds. Later on, like last year, I let the weeds get up, and the biggest sin you can have is let those weeds go to seed, and then you have billions, hundreds of millions of weed seeds, depending on which species of weed it is. They're just going to cover the area. And if you don't recognize it and you don't deal with those weed seeds and give them a chance to emerge early on in the season, what you do is you put your transplant in or put your seeds in, and then all of a sudden you could see all of those weed seeds there. One of the things that some people will do things timing, so they may want to get their carrots in the ground, or get some slow emerging seeds in the ground early in the season. Plant those before the weed seeds have emerged. Like, it takes about 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks for carrot seeds to emerge. So you could go on out and wet down the bed beforehand a couple of days, and that gives the weed seeds a chance to swell up and get ready to emerge. Leave the bed dry for a day. Go on out, use your seeder and put your carrot seeds down. Now you've got 10 days to 2 weeks before those carrot seeds are going to sprout and pop up through the surface. But in the meantime, the weed seeds will pop up, and you run the flame weeder over them before those carrot seeds start to emerge. So then you've just wiped out all the competition from all the weed seeds that are there in the bed, because you used a timing mechanism. You knew how long it would take for those carrot seeds to come up. You wetted the bed a couple of days before you did the planting of the carrot seeds. And you plant the carrot seeds when the beds are actually dry, then water them directly after that. And that's one way of controlling those weed seeds. I'm sorry this is taking longer than I had hoped it would take. So a few years ago, after seeing Jean-Martin Fortier in a video and him explaining the flame weeder, I went ahead and ordered some flamethrowers, which are propane torches, and I made a 6 torch unit, a homemade one. And that worked pretty well, but it was tough in high winds. It was difficult because of the training wheels that I used from an adult bicycle. Really wasn't good for our really high beds. If you've noticed, our permanent raised beds are, geez, they're very tall compared to the paths around them. So it didn't work as well. It was kind of a hassle. And I have used other systems. So this is a handheld, now a butane, or actually a propane torch hooks onto this, one of those bottles that you might do soldering with. And this is easy enough for me to go ahead and use this and reach around and do little spot weeding. So sometimes if I don't have weed mats down and I've got small recently emerged weed seeds that have come up around a plant, I can put a shovel to protect the plant that's there, and use the tip of this and just spot weld, or spot flame weed those newly emerged seeds. Then I've got a single propane nozzle that's a couple-inch nozzle, and I can go ahead and hit those problem areas. So in the western garden plot, in the next few days, I'll be going around, and some of the weeds that have started to come up from disrupting root systems and all around the blueberry bed, the blueberries that were transplanted recently, and around the cabbage and the rest of the plants there, I'll go ahead and wipe out a lot of those. Even though I'm going to put weed mats over there, I just want to knock down some of those weed seeds that are just about to emerge now, and just starting to emerge right now. So then we have the pyro weeder. The pyro weeder I purchased from Farmer's Friend. They're online. They've done lots of great videos. They have a really good team of people that go on out and listen to market gardeners and small-scale farmers, and they build caterpillar tunnels, like low tunnels and high tunnels to extend seasons for growing. They do the quick cut greens cutter, which I have. I think I've made a video about that in the past. So there's lots of neat tools, and they're kind of expensive, but if you're in the business of providing your community with produce, these tools really cut down the man hours. And they really took the flame weeders and really re-engineered the systems. And since I've purchased mine is a 30-inch, so it's a 5 nozzle, 30-inch wide flame weeder. And I just purchased the flame blade, which goes over the 5 nozzles that come out on the end of the flame weeder, and that helps because we're in such a high wind area here, that helps to use less fuel, keep control over the amount of heat that's hitting the surface of the soil, so you're not spending extra time or extra fuel in the system. So I've got the flame blades, which is just a stainless steel a guard that goes on both sides all around the nozzles themselves. This is made out of aluminum and some stainless steel. Everything has been engineered and designed beautifully, very adjustable as well. Sorry about that. And they made a bigger one now as well. So I think these are the cat's meow, and they've actually gotten to the point where I think they're like $200 less expensive per unit than the one that I got. But for me, for decreasing the number of hours working around here, it was amazing. Okay, now that I've said all those things, getting to what I actually did with our asparagus bed is I did a flail and burn. Not flame weeding, which is just gently going over the surface of the newly emerged weeds that have emerged. But I took more time. I actually made 3 passes. So as you look at the asparagus bed, and there's wood chips all over the surface of it, you could see that there's burn marks on the wood chips themselves, because I had quack grass, pokeweed, horsetail, you know, just all of these plants that have extensive root systems. So this system wasn't to go through and completely prep the bed and deal with the system. It was basically my attempt to try and get an advancement to do a big knockdown on the weeds, and then I'll go through and do more selective area digging up of some of the weeds, and also burning some persistent weeds. So when I talk about burning, so when we're flame weeding, we're just disrupting, without burning the leaves, we're just disrupting the cell wall and the cell membrane, and therefore photosynthesis can occur. So by going over the bed initially with the flail mower attached to the BCS tractor, which you've seen videos in the past on using the flail mower, what I do with the flail mower is I can go over the entire bed. Theo went out and harvested all the asparagus just beforehand, and this would be better to do earlier in the spring, but I wasn't healthy enough to do this as early as I wanted to do it. So the first thing to do is, when these weeds and some of the grasses were probably a foot tall, the clover was up a couple of inches high, the dockweed was probably a foot high as well. So you get the picture. It looked like a big green weed infested area. We cut out the asparagus first, then I ran the flail mower over it, and the flail mower, what it does is it rapidly cuts down all of it chops up all of the leaf surface above the surface of the ground down to just a centimeter or two, a half an inch or 3/4 of an inch high above the surface. And you can control that when you're using a flail mower. Now, could you use a small mower to do this? Could you use a weed whacker? Yes, you just want to cut. You want to eliminate as much of the green as possible. Why get rid of the green? Because that does the photosynthesis. So with these tenacious weeds that are there, there's a huge storage. So in the quack grass, you see all those white subsurface root system. Lots of carbohydrates and nutrients stored in that root system. So when you cut off the top of it, that quack grass right down to the ground, it's got enough reserves to send the greens up, and you can cut it off again and it'll send up more green. The idea is to stay on top of it by continually reducing the chances of the foliage being able to do photosynthesis, because eventually you're going to use up the storage component that's in the root system. But if the plant gets up and it gets like 4 inches tall, the foliage above the surface of the ground, it's going to do photosynthesis and keep putting more storage back into the root system or the tuber system, depending on what it is. So by using the flail mower first, I chopped up and eliminated so much of the burnable material. Then I took the pyro weeder, the one that I got from Farmer's Friend, went over the surface 3 times. Now again, I had harvested the asparagus beforehand, flail mowed the system, burnt all of the residual, the little nubs that were sticking out of the surface, which sets it back a couple of days. So in about 3 days time, which is 3 or 4 days now since I shot that the tour of the first food forest, I went out with the small GoPro camera, and you could see some of the asparagus is coming up because the asparagus has such an extensive root system as well. So I cut off the top of all of the asparagus, and when you cut off the top, you always use your blade just below the surface of the soil. So the heat from the flame weeder has to go down through the surface of the soil down a good inch before it can actually affect the root system or storage system of the asparagus. Whereas all of the weeds, we cut it down as close to ground level as possible, and we burnt the little nubs that were sticking there. and we heated up the surface of the soil. So some of the heat might have gone down an inch below the surface of the wood chips there as well. But you'll see the quack grass in the video, you can see some of that starting to shoot up. You'll see some of the dandelions starting to shoot up. So these weeds, these tenacious weeds, have an extensive root system. The horsetail will start shooting up as well. But this allows me now to go through, as I see the dandelions and all, I can go through with my shovel, dig up the dandelion. I could dig up some of the quack grass potentially. I'll use my potato fork for digging up the quack grass and decreasing some of the root structure. I won't be able to get it all out because I don't want to disturb the root system of the asparagus plants. So I think I covered everything with this. I'm sorry this video is another long one. But what I do in the garden beds is I use basically flame weeding, which is a nice steady walk going across with heating the surface of the beds, which is disrupting the cell membrane and the cell wall of the recently emerged weed seeds. What I did in the asparagus bed is I flail mowed first to decrease the bulk of the green foliage. Now I could keep going back with a weed eater or whatever and just keep knocking down all of that foliage, trying to get it right down to the surface level. As long as we keep decreasing the ability of that plant to do photosynthesis, it will keep using up the storage system from the roots to send up new shoots, but it won't be able to send more nutrients back down to its root system, so we'll run the plant out of its fuel. So I hope this all makes sense. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. If you found this video of value, please give us a thumbs up. And by all means, folks, stay safe, stay healthy. Remember social distancing. Wear a mask when you're out and around people and all. And take care. Bye-bye now.